Okay, I said I was going to explain more about the 91 because it's really important. Understand that when it's saying 91 AD here, that's Paul's counting. And when Paul is counting it, okay, he is saying Christ would have been 91 years old. Christ was born on Hanukkah, 4 BC. I have to call it 4 BC to align all the BC dates with the scholarship so you can vet everything I say. And in any event, however you want to call the year, 91 years later, he would have been 91. Okay, at the beginning of Nisan when he died, he was 33 years old. He'd been 33 years old for 4 months. Because Kislev, which is the month of Hanukkah, is 4 months prior. Okay, it's the 9th month of the sacred year. So to say 91 is talking about how old he would have been. But in the accounting that Paul's doing, and we're going to now go back to the verse, all right? In the accounting that Paul is doing, he's tallying everything up to a 91, which I'm going to explain shortly in this video. So when it says in agape prorisas, he's tallying to 91. He's doing it more than one way, but I'm only covering the simplest way he's doing it now. All right? Because that was the outer limit of when the tribulation was expected to begin by both believing Jews who believed Christ was the Messiah and by the Jews who believed in this dispensationalism I've been telling you about, but they didn't believe in Messiah. They still believed Messiah was supposed to come. They were thinking of it as a one-time shot, the ones who didn't believe in him. But everybody was agreed on that year. That's the point I want to make. This 91 here is how old he would have been. It's been forecast ever since Moses. I showed you when I talked about the 84, and hopefully you've looked up the documentation by now. And so 91 is 7 years after that. And everybody expected the Millennium, okay, the Rapture, the Tribulation rather, to begin at this point. And so when it didn't happen, Jews and Christians became disaffected in wide numbers. In fact, if you were to Google on early Christianity, there's going to be, among other entries that you can find, one of them is in Wikipedia that talks about the so-called Council of Jamnia, Jamnia, which was held in 90 AD. It's really awesome how this ends up tallying to Paul's chronology, because it shouldn't. It should be a couple of years off. But the so-called Council of Jamnia of 90 AD, that was where they split off from the Christians. They made a lot of decisions. The Jamnia was a place where the Jews, the religious Jews, went in the wake of all of the fighting and the persecution and stuff. They wanted to wait it out until the expected arrival of Messiah in 90 AD. So what they did is a lot of them up and went to Jamnia, okay, which was still in Israel but far away from Jerusalem. I think it was still in Israel. Anyway, that's when they began to collate and come up with other arguments and other ways of looking at Judaism in order to salvage the huge disaffection that was going on. Okay, this really upset the Jewish world. Christ coming and going. It split everybody. Okay? Because the scripture is so clear that it had to be him. And it was very upsetting to the religious Jews who didn't believe in him. And so they were trying to figure out how to retool themselves. By the same token, the Christians who were waiting for this, the 66 to occur, nothing happened. It's just like the campingites today. Camping made like 6 predictions. They all turned out to be wrong. Okay? And these predictions aren't wrong. They were all potential dates. But you know what? If you start expecting it's 66, you get disappointed when it doesn't happen. Okay? Then 73 and the temple goes down, nothing happens. Okay, 77, nothing happens. Meanwhile, people had already gone to Jamnia, those who didn't believe Christ was Messiah, and even some who did. And they were trying to figure out how to retool Judaism. So you had mass disaffection of both Jews and Gentiles, and then those who were still trying to be faithful, but thinking that somehow they must have misread Scripture. Well, they did misread it. They misread the fact that, we're now on church time. And you can't predict these numbers anymore. And that's what Paul is setting them up for. Because Paul's writing long before this happens. When Christ would have been 56. And he's telling them, when Christ is 91, guess what? I'm not even going to benchmark the 91. I'm going to benchmark it as 94 to make a point of the fact that the deadline is going to be missed. See? This was the last one he benchmarked. And then he skips right over 91, although you can read it embedded in here. Christ is pregnant with everybody on the cross. All right, so it's cute here that he does it this way. But in terms of the ending meter, he skips right over to 94. He's warning them in advance. Don't expect the rapture to occur on the old schedule. Ain't going to happen. Because church isn't going to mature. And by benchmarking it the way he does, with the expected dates, he's telling you why church doesn't mature. Same reason as with the Thessalonians. When you read him talk about, the rapture with the Thessalonians in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. In 1st Thessalonians, he's telling them the timeline. And no, you can't predict it. And in 2nd Thessalonians, he's upbraiding them because they're all hung up on, well, how come the rapture is going to happen the way we want it to happen? Yeah, and the Jews were thinking the same way, even when they didn't believe in Messiah, because the second 2100 was supposed to begin in what I'm calling 94 AD, but obviously I'm going to have to retool my timeline. Okay? So Paul skips right over the real expected date. And in the Council of Jamnia, which was a series of councils, okay? It's like every year they had a meeting and they tried to decide what they were going to do. And in the 90 AD Council, which you can find if you Google on early Christianity, and you'll find a Wikipedia entry on early Christianity. If you read that, you'll find them mention the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD. Okay, and I don't know where they get that, but it was kind of odd that they had that number. Like, I can tell it from the Bible. I didn't really need to see that, but, it's helpful. So this is when Christians really went south, and this is when the Jews really went south. This is how come they reinvented the meaning of God to be one person. Everybody and his brother, inside and outside Christianity, was really upset that the timeline that they had been taught to measure 2100 years and 2100 years, it didn't happen. All right? So it should have been Christ's 91st birthday, in the year of his 91st birthday. And I hope you know, that if you turn 90 years old, that's the very beginning of your 91st year. Okay? So Paul is making a play on when his 90th birthday, okay, he begins to be 91. He's beginning his 91st year then. All right? And that was the schedule. And it doesn't get met. And Paul's telling you it won't get met by hitting 94. All right? Now, the other way he's doing that is he's beginning a new 21. New temple building time. We flunked this period right here. Okay, we went to 21, it didn't happen. We went to an additional 7 because we flunked. And if we had passed at that time, we'd have been in heaven as church. Okay, but it ain't going to happen. So he's beginning a brand new 21 temple building, starting here, and he's just skipped completely over 90. That's the point he's going to make. That was what he was leading up to, and that's the point he's going to make for the balance of this passage. Okay, he's going to show how church progressively apostatizes. All right? Now, in history, we know this in several different ways. One way we know straight from Scripture is the writings of John in particular. At this point, John starts rolling out his gospel, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and then finally Revelation during this period. Okay, he's exiled by Domitian on Patmos, circa 96 AD, which is just after the 94 happens. And basically, Revelation is an update on what Paul had written. Okay? He's playing to what Paul had written. All right? He's explaining, okay, this is why the rapture didn't happen. And we see in Revelation chapters 1 through 3 the sad record of church. How apostate church had become. All right? And unfortunately, and I have to say this, all those so-called church fathers were all of them apostate. They had stopped believing in the rapture. You can see that from their own text. And I'm not really sure the names of the people, like Justin Martyr, Ignatius, and all that. I'm not sure at all that those people actually wrote those books. Okay, they're they're horrible. They're full of self-righteousness. They're full of self-praise. And that makes it sound more like somebody else slapped their name on a book and wrote the book as an honorific of those people. So maybe, like Justin Martyr was a good guy, and maybe Ignatius was a good guy, but they didn't write like that if they were good guys. You don't write a letter praising yourself if you're really spiritual. Somebody else does it for you. And that's what probably happened. The so-called church father writings are probably written by other people, and a lot of scholars think that they are. They're trying to figure out, over the last, couple thousand years, they've been trying to figure out how much of each of those so-called church father books were really written by church fathers versus somebody else writing it about the church fathers. Because they've all got this really sickeningly sweet, excruciatingly religious tone about them. And they got lots of false information in there. And in my popemyth.htm webpage, which also contains my Pope Myth videos, I go through those texts. And mostly in audios that are in the video descriptions. But it's really disgusting, the church father writing. It's horrible. It's just, ugh. Okay, so if those people were good guys, and they were all, starting about this period of time, if they were good guys, then they didn't write that stuff. And of course, if they were bad guys, they were busy praising themselves and making a big stink about blah, 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 apostolic succession and stuff, because John was exiled on Patmos, and there was a big power grab in Rome to take over the Corinthians at that point. Now, a lot of bad stuff has been said about Catholicism, and a good bit of that is warranted. But here I want to say something kind about Catholicism. The Catholics, one thing about them that we owe them for, okay, all Christians owe Catholics for this, they preserved all the writings they had, warts and all, okay? They did doctor the Vulgate, or maybe they didn't doctor it, but somebody in the 2nd century doctored the Vulgate to create Petra, because it was not a Latin word in the 1st century, okay, for bedrock. They created that word Petra in order to make it look like Peter was the rock. I went through my videos showing that from the Vulgate, comparing it to the Greek and showing how it was back translated. Okay, but the people who became the Catholics in the 2nd century were sticklers for preserving absolutely everything, good, bad, or indifferent. And you got to give them credit for that. Okay, the Greek manuscripts that we got, the whatever Hebrew manuscripts we got, they were sticklers for relics, and they did a doggone good job of preserving them, warts and all. And basically, Catholicism is an eclectic kind of combination of different beliefs in Christianity. They were trying to defend themselves. It wasn't like somebody woke up in the morning and said, "Hi, we're going to invent the Catholic religion." It was a sort of consensus that gradually grew out of the apostasy that came about when the rapture didn't happen as expected. In other words, the Jews were retooling themselves, but so were the Christians. And everybody was apostate. Okay? I mean, nearly everybody. Whoever were the faithful, you won't know them in history. So the kind of doctrines that came out of the 2nd century AD were the product of everybody trying to sort of fit together and defend themselves, and they had all these persecutions going on, and how do we call ourselves, and what do we call sound doctrine, and all this stuff, and everybody was disaffected from the rapture, so they threw it out. They shouldn't have, but they did. And part of the reason they threw it out is they wanted to distance themselves from the Jews, and this was a cornerstone doctrine of Jewish dispensationalism. And so in all the fighting with the Jews, and the Jews fought with the Christians too, everybody is to blame here. Okay, we're all guilty. That was one of the reasons why the whole business about the timeline was jettisoned, in order to distance from the Jews. And a lot of anti-Semitism grew, but the Jews were also anti-Christian. So all this infighting that originally began between Jews and Jews got more and more separated, and a lot of false doctrine got in. There were a lot of those stupid fake gospels that came in. There were a lot of stupid ideas about visions and dreams and all kinds of stupid fables about the apostles that came in. There was a power grab over the Corinthians by somebody who, maybe not really Clement, but somebody who's calling himself Clement, that wrote to the Corinthians. All that junk is going on. And God bless them, the Catholics just preserved the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. And they even know a lot of the stuff is false. I mean, my own Catholic books that I got from my uncle, because my family is largely Catholic. It's called A Library of Devotion, and it's Archbishop Cardinal Stritch in Chicago, 1953, the year I was born. That Catholic Library of Devotion, which was given to me, was published by the Catholic Church. Even they talk about in the Life of Mary, for example, that stuff is fable. But it was accepted by the Church's tradition. Why? Because it was true. I don't mean that the doctrine about Mary was true. The belief about Mary was there. They just preserved the history of the tradition, and they sanctified it by preserving it. And of course, nowadays, a lot of people think, Mary Theotokos, and they believe that that's true, that she was a perpetual virgin. But, the Catholics in the know that was just a story that got passed on and became tradition and became accepted because it was tradition, not because it was actually true. All right? So before you go on saying that the Catholics are the whore of Babylon, bear in mind, everybody was a whore in those days. That's exactly what Revelation 17 was about. Christianity was politicizing in this period as an attempt to self-defend against the Jews, against the Romans, against others who differed with them in their particular brand of heresy. Everybody was a heretic in these days. And the Catholic flavor of it just became politically dominant in the final analysis. And Paul's actually going to trace that here. But before you go blaming the Catholics, understand everybody was like this. It's just a question of which brand of apostasy got political control by 300 AD. All right? And Paul is telling that story when he says, hi, you flunked here, so we're going to start the 21 over. And by the way, you're going to skip over the expected old date because you're going to be apostate. We aren't going to be saying in agape pro risas because we ain't going up. There ain't going to be no rapture. And in fact, we're going to stop believing in the rapture at this point. He skips right over to it. And this is why John's books got written, to tell you, hi, You're apostate. That's chapters 1 through 3 of Revelation. Chapter 4 is the actual rapture event, but it's undated now. It's just two doors. A door opens and a door closes. Okay? Christ says, come up here. That's the same as 1 Thessalonians 4:17. All right? He doesn't come down. We go up. And then chapter 4 is the, title deed of the earth, ceremony of the Lamb. And that's the rapture, and that's what kicks off the tribulation. There's this big parenthesis in Revelation 4 until Revelation 7, which begins the accounting on earth of the tribulation. But chapters 4 through 6, in Greek drama style, first set up the prologue of what's going to happen and the cause of it, which is the title deed ceremony in chapter 4. Okay, and then you got the historical trends, which also apply during church, in Revelation 6, and then Revelation 4 and 5 is the explanation as to why those trends are what they are. And then Revelation 7 is the sealing of the 144,000 Jews. That's the actual tribulation beginning on earth. It's a parenthesis that's taking you back full circle to Revelation 4:1. So those two chapters are simultaneous. But since, John is writing out the text, he has to first set it up in Greek drama style and then bring you back full circle to the same event. So Revelation 7 and Revelation 4:1 are beginning at the same time. Okay, but he has to tell the parenthesis first, and then he takes you back to that same day. So the tribulation beginning is not dated. John is writing it at the time that it should have begun. So right then and there, that ain't going to happen. And you know why in chapters 1 through 3, church is apostate. Some of them were good, but most of them were bad. So that's how Revelation plays out. Okay, so John is writing back to this very period that Paul is talking about. And Christ would have been 91 here. And if you go back and look at Psalm 90, verse 5a is 7 syllables long. Verse 4 had ended at 84 syllables. So everybody's tying back to Psalm 90. 84 and 7 is 91. Christ would have been 91. This is when the rapture should have happened at the outside, based on the Mosaic law. And when it didn't happen, everybody got disaffected, and everybody got really apostate from this point forward. So now Paul starts us over and says, okay, you flunked. We're going to start a new temple building period at the 21. Okay? So, if during this 21-year period, which started in 94, really starts here, and agape prorisas gemas, okay, then you got another 11 syllables, and it ends here at 105, which is divisible by 7. Now, if church had, at that point, matured, and now Paul is explaining, of course, that it's a problem, we might not, then this would be our testimony. Look at this. That's what we would be saying up in front of Christ. Into his heirship. In other words, in Revelation 4, it's a big ceremony of what everybody's saying. This would have been us talking. Okay? And John doesn't mention it in Revelation 4 because it's already been mentioned by Paul. So people alive during this 21 years are going to be remembering what this is and saying, okay, this could be our future. The rapture can happen tomorrow. I'm in his heirship, and if it doesn't happen, by means of love, he still foreordained us. See? And going through the persecutions, which at this time was pretty severe. Okay, this was a big period of persecution under Domitian. Well, actually, Domitian would die about 96 AD. But after him, it still continued. Okay? And it sort of slacked off. In 96 AD, Nerva came to power after Domitian, and there was a sort of brief respite with that because Domitian's persecution had been so bad. especially for the Jews, well, actually more for the Christians than the Jews. Nerva set up attacks against the Jews, but the Christians were exempted from it. So this was kind of where there began to be a differential between the Jews and the Christians. Okay? But the persecution of both groups was still going on because the people didn't like them. Christians were saying only their version of God was the right one. The Jews were saying the same thing. So Christians and Jews were persona non grata in the Roman Empire. And that's when you have all that stuff attributed to Justin Martyr and Ignatius starting up here. Okay? And the timeline fits. I mean, you can just go look up the dates. All right? But if you were alive during that time, you would be clinging to this as a promise. Well, if the church raptures now, he foreordained me, I'll keep on going. And, while you're going to the lions or whatever was happening to you under persecution, you'd be claiming this as your promise. See, because Paul had set it up. Each segment, here's what you can know. Each segment, this is characteristic of your time. All right? So you would claim that as a promise. Part of your doxology. You would be claiming this as a promise. Because the rapture really could have happened then. All right? Now, Paul is also telling you that it probably won't happen. All right? 21 is allotted for temple building, but guess what? He's trying to tell you, we're going to flunk. And to compensate for the fact that he's telling you we're going to flunk, he brings in the first of 3 anaphora, which I covered partly already in my Trinity anaphora video, the Eudokian anaphora. Eudokian means good report, and he's playing right to Isaiah 53:1 when he uses that term. I covered that in the Trinity anaphora video. You'll notice that at this point, we're 114 years. Christ would have been 114 years old at the end. And our testimony would be into him, per his own delight, if we had been raptured up by that time. And if not, Paul's explaining here, starting here, and it's just really climactic. You're going to have to read the document for it because it's very complicated. But he's saying at this point, you know what? God's going to make something really big out of this delay. And the Eudokian anaphora begins a set of assets, an explanation of the assets we have in Christ, which roll out in a series of crescendos, starting right here. And that's where we'll pick up in the next increment.